Hello, greetings everyone. My name is Josh Wachtel. I'm the communication specialist at the IIRP, and I am happy to welcome you to today's author chat, Intentional Classroom Engagement. We are very excited about this webinar, which presents a book in our new Advanced Practitioner series, which is going to be focused really for developing your practice beyond the basic level. So glad to have you here with us. I want to let everybody know that we would love to have you chat where you're from. But before you do that, hold on, because there's a little trick of Zoom that I want you to pay attention to. When you chat, select two, click on that, all panelists and attendees. If you just go with the all panelists default, then all the participants won't get to see. So click all panelists and attendees and chat in there where you're coming from. We'd love to see where folks are joining us. We're very excited. We've over 100 attendees, and who knows where it'll land out. We had 300 people register today for this webinar. So again, thanks for being here. Upstate New York, Columbia, Missouri, Florida, Portugal, wow, Ontario, Canada, Monticello, Iowa. All right, you're going to have to take some time and look through those. Very exciting to see people coming from all over. At this time, we would also like to open a poll just to get a sense of what your roles are and whether you're in the different areas of education or just here to hear what it's all about. Please let us know, and we'll give that a minute for you to respond to. The IIRP Graduate School offers master's degree, Master of Science in Restorative Practices, graduate certificate in restorative practices, and professional development of all kinds, both publicly and we work directly with schools and organizations as well. And you can find out everything on our website, iirp.edu. All right, hoping we have some poll results there. Can you, oh, here we go. All right, great. So it looks like we have a nice spread of classroom teachers, quite a few school counselors and social workers, a lot of folks in higher education, and then it looks like administrators, special ed, and some paraprofessionals too. So great. And we have a lot of others, which is always great to have people interested, because obviously restorative practices is not just about work in schools. There are community justice that can be related to schools and or just other applications in the field. All right. So welcome to today's author chat about intentional classroom engagement, which, as I said, is the first book in the Advanced Practitioner series. This workbook will help you develop skills and competencies to build better relationships with your students, their families, and your colleagues. I am joined today by Dr. Craig Adamson, who is Provost and Associate Professor at the IIRP Graduate School. He is a veteran restorative practitioner with more than 25 years of experience delivering counseling and educational services to delinquent, dependent, and at-risk youth. And leading the conversation today with Craig, we also have Kevin Jones. Kevin, can you pop up there? He is an IIRP lecturer. Kevin has spent more than 35 years working in the fields of social services, mental health, and education philosophy. As a retired school administrator, Kevin continues to work with Central Illinois Regional School Districts to support restorative leadership team development. And both of our practitioners today, author Dr. Craig Adamson and Kevin Jones, have a lot of experience in restorative practices, both within education and also beyond. So with that, I will invite Kevin Jones, Kevin, to kick things off. Thanks, Kevin, for joining us today.
And thank you for Josh. And I am honored and thrilled to be here. I've had the opportunity to read this book twice now, and actually began to use this book in the work I do in my community. My regional office of education, who I've been doing a lot of restorative practice leadership building with trying to get some teams to support all of our schools. We've actually already ordered 100 of these books with the plan to order more because we're going to start using them as early as this summer to develop some PLCs and really kind of get into the use of this book. When I had the opportunity to read it, I got so excited for so many reasons. Josh mentioned that, yes, I am a faculty lecturer for IIRP graduate school, but I also do training for IIRP and coaching. And when I was reading this book, I just had so many aha moments. And the aha moments was, wow, this book is putting in writing a lot of the things that I want participants at the training to take away. So I'm excited about the book. I can't wait to interview Craig, and got some questions lined up for him. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to invite Craig on. How you doing, sir? Good seeing you today. So we're going to just dive right in. We're going to dive right in. I got a list of questions for you. And the first question that comes to mind, Craig, is why did you write the book?
Thanks for having me, Kevin, and thanks for being here with me. I think that one of the motivating factors for me to write this book was many of the conversations I've had with restorative practitioners throughout the world, going to some of our different international conferences, getting an opportunity to talk to educators and leaders in schools as well as community leaders. And many folks said, we've done the training, or even if it wasn't through IIRP, and they've gotten connected to restorative practices, and they said, listen, we get the initial piece. We're running circles, we're doing some of the good work. However, like, what's the next step? Or those folks that are the early adopters and they were hungry for learning more. There wasn't much out there to really kind of dive into the space as far as being, from a developmental perspective, what are those next steps? So that really motivated me to think through what that would look like in a workbook, something that's really kind of hands-on for the practitioner that they could go and grab and take a look. The other thing, besides working at the IIRP graduate school, I'm also the president of the model programs of IIRP, which is called Community Service Foundation and Bucksmont Academy. And their programs, their schools, drug and alcohol programs, counseling programs, community-based, fairly large, intense experience for youth and keeping them in their community. And I've been doing that work for over 25 years. And that's rooted in the philosophy of restorative practices. And many times when I've met people at conferences, or if they're here, I'd say, hey, come visit our school where you get to see circles and get to see it in action. And so I wanted to take what we've learned there and how we've implemented restorative practices in a daily way, in a really practical way, and kind of get it down on paper. And that wasn't easy. And a lot of people helped me in that. But those were really the motivating factors for me, Kevin, to write some of this, and just through the conversations with others and how are they implementing and restorative practices and kind of those next steps and those needs that people were expressing.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember when I actually first got the book in mail, I was excited. And I was reading through it, and I'm sure you remember, I texted you a couple of times because I just kept having so many aha moments. And I think I said to you was, wow, this book is exactly what you want to leave people with in training. But we know in training, we only have so much time. And what I love about this is just what you're talking about, that ability to have a resource to fully embed this work and to have activities that allow people to engage in the deeper learning of the book. So about that part, again, I have a lot of aha moments, but that is definitely one that I take with me. The next question is just, what was your process? How did you unpack all of this? I mean, what was your process as far as writing?
Yeah, for me, it was important to think about how how adults learn from an adult learning theory. What structure would be most helpful? And one of the things that we do at our trainings is we really promote the idea of 80% proactive approaches and building relationship and building community, and hopefully only needing to do 20% of the responsive work, right? Or less. So that's how I really approached the book, was to really think about and use some reflective exercises about how can we be proactive? How can we show up to work and intentionally be proactive in building relationship with our students, with our colleagues, with leaders, and doing this work. So that's really how I came about the structure. I did provide a little context and background. I provided a little bit of the history as I saw it. It was a lot of fun to be able to write that from my own purview. And I provided a little bit of the research and backdrop, as we start to talk about restorative practices as an emerging social science or discipline, the research, the work that we're doing being embedded in evidence is important to me as well. So yes, there's the majority of it is practice focused and reflection, and what does it mean to be a restorative practitioner and how you come to work every day, but also there's some of that research and conceptual framework in each in the book and within the chapters. I structured some of the chapters to be really kind of quick, page and a half of the conceptual framework, and then it's getting to a tip. There's resources. So this isn't just about what my thoughts are. There's a lot of folks that are doing some wonderful work, and I tried to pull in some of those resources from other places that people are doing and put it in one place for the reader. But it's so that the reader can grab it, and the teacher, we know time is an issue in education. I know that I'm going into this issue potentially tomorrow, or I'm struggling with this. I can go to chapter 6 and go to that section and get right to it. So that was really my intention of the structure of the book and how it might be utilized. So it's really a workbook style, and teachers and educators and folks can go right to the section that's important to them.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking of so many follow-up questions. And, the one thing that came to mind right away, and that struck me about the book, I mean, the fact that, yes, a lot of the chapters were short and then went right into activity. And that's why I keep thinking professional learning communities, because, a lot of times in schools, we don't get a lot of time. We do the trainings and we go there, the basic restorative practice is 4 days. And then if people want to go deeper, there's a lot of time commitment, which I strongly encourage because it gets you prepared for this book. And but I really, really loved how you organized it. And especially when you had, the referrals or the sightings down at the bottom for people can continue their individual learning as they do this. And when I think of it from, like I said, from a training perspective, I'm sitting there reading this book, and so many times the ahas for me was like, wow, this is what I would like to leave people with. And this book, in my opinion, is that resource to leave people with. So the other question, though, is, it's intentional classroom engagement. You targeted teachers. What's the reason behind targeting teachers?
Yeah, well, a lot of my work over the last 10 years has been in education, working with school systems. And I think the perspective that I took was both from, a leader within, whether it's superintendent or CEOs of schools, whether that's, charter schools or public systems, to the class. I've worked with several folks that it's a classroom teacher feeling quite alone, that they're the only ones in their school that are, engaged in restorative practices or knowledgeable and trying things out. So, I think that I wrote the book with everyone in mind, but specifically around educators. I taught for several years, about 4 years, I guess. I was a guest faculty member Teachers College at Columbia, and that was in the Summer Principals Academy, named SPA, but it really wasn't SPA. It was a pretty rigorous program. But Teachers College was on the cutting edge, and it was really immersed in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the idea of restorative practices, creating the space to be able to have brave and courageous conversations in education and in urban public systems, school systems. Was the frame of the program, and restorative practices was brought in as one of the ways for us to do that. And many of the students in those programs were teachers or developing into leaders or just leaders in their buildings, and we're really looking for new approaches post this idea of zero tolerance, and what does that look like, creating new policy, trying to be more progressive, and what does it mean to create safe places to learn, including social and emotional learning and restorative practices. So from those experiences, as well as what IRP's been doing the work in Pittsburgh Public Schools and some of our other projects, I thought being very specific to the classroom was a need. So that was something that was personal for me, and some of my own experiences that I wanted to bring to the wider network of restorative practitioners.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. And what is the most important thing you want your readers to take away? When they read this book, what do you want the outcome to be? What do you want the most important thing you want them all to take away?
Well, good question. I think, Kevin, that I start out the book about the restorative practitioner, and I start, some of keeping it simple, and it's about you, not them, right? So it starts with us. It starts with how we're engaging others, what our mindset is, what our biases are, what does that look like as we go to teach? What are the actions that we're doing to develop and enhance our skills and competencies as restorative practitioners? So, for me, an example would be that I provide in the book in some activities is start to be reflective and think about that. So how am I intentionally building relationship with the students today? Am I facilitating a circle? Is there some content that I can deliver in a more relational way? How can I take that next step? How am I engaging the parents? Is there a parent that isn't engaged that I can find a different way in order to invite them to be part of the solution? So there's several different reflective exercises that I do within the book, or it's just not individual. As you mentioned, Kevin, it could be in a professional learning community, PLCs, that schools might be trying to implement something. And we know there's a lot of good ideas in education. However, we know that when it comes to implementation, sometimes it's like drinking from a fire hose, right? There's so many new initiatives coming towards educators. Which piece do you pick? But I'm trying to create some activities to really help folks embed those skills in how to be a restorative practitioner, what you can do in some activities, real simple activities that you can come in a professional learning community or yourself to be able to talk through and dialogue about what those issues are or those activities are, and what are some of the outcomes.
Yeah. So, just again, thank you, Craig. I have so many, I keep saying aha, because that's what keeps coming to mind. And I think about, I do TLT trainings for IIRP as well. How would this book help the trainer of trainers to help the participants learn more, to go deeper, to understand, to see what restorative practices look like in real time? How would this be a good resource for trainers of trainers?
Right. Yeah, I think that many times school systems respond to implementing restorative approaches in different ways. Sometimes there's a steering committee for some of the larger. Maybe there's a group of people that's a professional learning community that's in charge of certain aspects of things, or some are doing the proactive and some are doing the responsive. There's several folks that have been put in a position of responsibility of taking this initiative and moving it forward. But there's not a lot of structure or guidance. in how that might look, or teaching other adults to implement. This isn't easy work at times, right? When you're in a classroom and you're pushing into issues of social, emotional, or trauma that kids have experienced, and they're going to start to come up in classroom in circles. I've heard from several teachers of, that area. I'm a teacher. I deliver content. I'm not a counselor. I don't know really what to do when those things come up. That I just, go to the guidance counselor, social worker, but I think that what we're trying to do, Kevin, and what you do in coaching and in training, and what I'm trying to convey here in this workbook is that it's the human factor, right? So if kids are sharing things with us, it's because there's some level of trust of getting to adult and hoping to get some support in what that may look like. And I don't expect everybody to be an expert out of here. You still may need the guidance counselor and the social work to be able to support the needs of that student. However, that there are some ways that you can engage in this and build community within your classroom, run circles. And it's just not the social and emotional part. It's also can be at a lower level of how do you build relationship in delivering academic circles, right? How do we introduce content in a circle that I talk a little bit about? So that time factor that comes up is you don't need to find another half an hour in your day that you don't have. How can you incorporate it as part of your everyday teaching? And maybe you're going to make some adjustments to your pedagogy, or if you're teaching other adults on how to implement that, or if you're responsible for that, or you're part of a steering committee, this workbook hopefully will help you and being a resource. So it's just not people running to you and doing this and then going back, that they have another resource that they can refer to. We do some coaching and consulting in higher ed. We're working with 30 different universities right now in a project, and each university is doing a different restorative project in higher ed. And if you think about community and you think about students and things like that, even given this last year with COVID, it's been difficult for a lot of folks. One of the things that I try to advise is that you're not creating the one expert model that, you get to the one person and they come in and they do it and then they leave, right? So how can we build that capacity, right, for others to be able to feel comfortable, to be able to facilitate, to engage? And that's really what I'm hoping for, that people, when you say, what are they going to walk away with? Yeah. I'm hoping they'll walk away. Okay, this is a long way to answer. I hope they'll walk away with, this was a really practical, useful guide. And I jumped to chapter 7 and I was able to do the work. So yes. If that's them walking away with it, and that's what, folks are saying, I'd be really happy with that.
Yes. Yes. And I did notice that when I read the book as well, how flexible it is that you can, like when I read it the first time, I went all the way through, but then as I started to utilize the book and working with some of the small groups that I work with, I was able to jump to that area and have something specific. And I really do love, because a lot of times with books, you're reading so much about theory, and you touched on the theory, but you went right into what it looks like in real time. And I think for educators especially, that is just something they need, because it is, one of the things I've done working with IIRP is, coaching and traveling and training all around the country. And so much of the pushback is, when are we going to do it? And it's hard to have people trust the process. And so I think this will definitely have a positive impact on the readers. Something you mentioned to me when we were talking to get ready for this, you had said something, you made a comment about moving circles from cream flavors. What did you mean by that? Moving circles from ice cream flavors.
Yeah, that was a conversation, and it was interesting. There were several people. I mean, part of writing this book, it was I tried to be pretty inclusive of some others to get this went through several different iterations. Dr. Pamela Randall Gardner from Castle was really helpful, gave me some feedback. Dr. Lou Fletcher from District 49 were really helpful, giving me some feedback. and Steve Coor. You know, there's some very instrumental people in thinking through these things. But you know, there's kind of that common theme of, you know, you're doing go around circles and it's great. You're building connection in the beginning of school, but how do you transform that group to the next level, right? How do you dig a little bit deeper? So if by November, one of the chapters in here is beyond ice cream flavors, is if you're still running, what's your favorite ice cream flavor in November, and you haven't really done anything else in your class, you know, this is to push those folks to the next step, and what might be some other things to engage in relationship. And I'm not, you know, I'm doing this a little tongue in cheek, you know, in regards to, you know, with, you know, ice cream flavors and things like that. But that's kind of that surfacey stuff, right? But it's also that balance on the other side, Kevin. And as you know, you also want to check your assumptions when you're asking questions, right? You just don't want to come in after summer break and say, hey, tell me about your vacation this summer. Just because I may have went on vacation doesn't mean that everybody went on vacation. So, you know, it's giving practitioners some food for thought as they're starting to construct what it means to engage and to build relationship, but also keeping that balance of what's a healthy boundary as an adult and as a professional. And what does that look like? So how to dig in, how to build relationship, how to create that balance as a professional, and having some real practical ideas around what that looks like. I have tip sections in each of them. And again, the resources to go to some other places. There's a lot of wonderful work going on. This is not an exhaustive list. And I'm sure there's plenty of people today on the webinar that are doing some really exciting and amazing work. I think one of our greatest strengths is that if we start to connect and get connected to our networks, that's one of the other things that I'm really pushing to reach out and connect with other restorative practitioners. We can learn so much from each other. So that's the other piece that I'm really excited about.
Yeah. And hearing you say that, especially about the incredible people who, like you said, are on this webinar session, but just some incredible people for me, as you know, I started this explicit restorative practice work about 7 years ago. But one of the things that I always share out is some of the incredible people I meet around the world who are doing this work and how global this work is. And that, you know, we think of it a lot around schools, but it's definitely bigger than schools. And I know those are things that I take away and just resonate and talk about. You know, back to the book, when I was reading it, I kept thinking about, and I do this in my trainings as well, I keep thinking about that continuum, the restorative practice continuum. How would you align this book with the restorative practice continuum? Because I look at that continuum and this is what it looks like in real time. So how would you align your book, your workbook with the continuum?
Yeah, I think that there's several opportunities and exercises around the use of like affective statements and affective questions. When we're thinking about Topkin's affect theory and Nathanson's work on shame, I've moved beyond that a little bit, utilizing Broken Legs, Circle of Courage work, infusing some of that. Glenn Singleton's work in regards to courageous conversation. So I think that the continuum is definitely there, but it's also some of the pushing to what are some of those next steps. Awesome. I think the informal pieces are definitely there, but as we work up the continuum to circles and conferences, one of the restorative conferences or family group decision-making conferences, one of the things that we've always had a conversation around in the model programs is, when do we do circles or when do we go to the next step and do a restorative conference? At what level of harm, does there have to happen in order for us to include other community members, to bring them in to be part of a restorative conference? Because the time and investment to do that is pretty significant at times. And I've held conferences, I've co-facilitated a conference with more than 50 people in a situation in a community where there was 6 offenders that went out and just vandalized a whole community. And that was pretty significant, and it took a lot of time and energy to do. So I talk about that in the workbook and push people to think through with their PLCs or with themselves, in their classroom, what are the things ahead of time, not just in the midst of an incident or something, what are some of the things you can start to think through to say, this would be a time that we'd want to run a circle, but these other potential incidents might be, or the potential harm might be something that we want to run a conference with. And then what does reintegration look like? Mm-hmm. So, it's just not the intervention of a conference, right? It's about how do we bring folks back in to feel part of that community, I think is important. So the continuum's in there in regards to how I framed it as that next step, but it's not as explicit as, each chapter is part of the continuum, but it's definitely was part of my purview as I was writing this, from more informal to formal.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Craig. Is there anything else specifically you want to share with the audience about your book or anything around the work that you've been doing?
I would just say that it's just been such a humbling experience. I really appreciate all the folks who contributed, and they took time. This has been a really crazy year, but they took time out of their busy schedules because they think this work is important, as well as I do. So it's been a passion of mine. I've been here at IIRP CSF in Bucks Mountain. It'll be 26 years in July. It's been something that has been my passion in my professional career. I've pretty much grown up doing this. When we first started, before it was restorative practices and restorative justice, it was action counseling. Now it's evolved into, it was restorative justice for years and restorative practices, and it's become its own discipline. When we first started doing this, restorative practices, when you Googled it, was either dental work or restoring houses were like the #1 hits on restorative practices. And now, when you go online, you see a ton of work that people have done, practitioners have done, research around restorative processes, and it's just amazing to watch that happen over the time that I've been involved. So, and there's people that have preceded me, and the indigenous roots are part of this for hundreds of years. So, that I'm just in awe, and I'm very humbled to just be part of that conversation. But thanks for hosting, Kevin, and having this conversation with me. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And honestly, I came across this list of restorative practice about 7 years ago, and I was really preparing to kind of wind down my career. I do a lot of sports. My kids have been in sports. I coach sports, play sports. And I had kind of had this picture of myself refereeing sports and maybe teaching part-time at a junior college or something. And then I ran across IIRP, and it started a whole new career. And there were so many times over my career, because my skill set was in de-escalation, working with population that was considered tough to work with, and their families, and even staff. And that was a strength of mine. But I didn't know how to teach people to do it. And what restorative practices did for me, it gave me a language and a framework to share that out. And I'm so passionate about helping others get to that point, because we want to build capacity. We want to spread this simple practices because of its impact. And this book is another resource that I will be using moving forward and sharing out. So thank you again. If I could see the audience, I would tell them to give you a big hand, because this book is absolutely phenomenal. But instead, I'm gonna transition back over to Josh.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Craig. I'm really enjoying this discussion, and I can tell from the questions we've already gotten, and from some of the comments and discussion in the chat, that people have a lot of good things to think about right now. So at this point, I do want to say that the book is available in the IIRP bookstore. Ben, can you just put that slide up quick? Ben Wachtel is our systems architect, but he's filling in as our Zoom tech today, running all the production. So he gets a hand too, please. We were going to go to Q&A for the remainder of the time. We have till 3 o'clock. which is great. We have a lot of time for Q&A. I have some great questions already, but if you have a great question or just anything you're curious about, go into the Q&A. That's a different tab from the chat. I did pull your questions out of the chat, those who asked them there. There weren't so many comments that I couldn't compile them, and I'll do my best. The other thing I want to let you know about at this point, Ben, can you change the slide? We are offering an event in July with Kevin and Craig again. And this is going to be a deeper dive into these issues, and it's designed as a learning workshop for teachers. So it's intentional classroom engagement workshop, a two-part workshop that will help educators foster a spirit of shared ownership and responsibility within their classroom. And it's taught by Craig and Kevin. They will host two 90-minute Zoom sessions, the first on building positive community, the second on responding to harm. Each session will include specific instruction along with interactive breakouts where you will engage in practical exercises and dialogue with fellow participants. All right. Now, at this point, I would like to go into the question and answer session. And the first one is the book's target audience experienced teachers, or would this be appropriate for education students as well?
I think it's appropriate for both. I've had some conversations with some universities that might start to use it for student or teacher prep courses and incorporating it there as well. But in the graduate school, I think that I see several students that say, I've been doing this my whole career. I just didn't know what to call it. Right. So, and it just gives it more of an explicit frame, like Kevin was talking about, to be able to implement it on purpose. So I think it could be, the whole sphere of teachers and their experiences.
Great. If you're going to use the book as a PLC, how would you format it? Duration, suggestions for, reading chapters among the, deliver the reading of chapters among the participants, anything would be appreciated.
Kevin, do you want to take that one? I mean, you've had some experience with the PLCs and doing some coaching. Do you want to chat about that?
Yes. I would say my advice would be, in the beginning, I would duplicate exactly what I did. I read it the first time just to really get a feel for it. But then for when I was thinking about PLC, I was thinking about, and again, I'm introducing this to my region. And so my plan is to start out with, go through the entire book in a proactive way just for learning, but then have those, when things come up from a responsive perspective, to have it as a resource. So I walk through the book, from beginning to end, and I would invite people to walk through the book from beginning to end. So then if something comes up from a responsive standpoint, you can go back to that. So I think it can be used a lot of ways. I think, again, about the short chapters. Hey, we're going to kick off our PLC. I want everybody to read these 3 pages, look at the activities, and we're going to get together, since we only have an hour in our PLC, and we're going to go a deeper dive and talk about some of those, the things that came out of it. So that's how I envision using it.
Yeah, I just to add on to that a little bit, Kevin, I think that's a helpful approach. If you're going to ask me, all right, we have a defined period of time, Craig, where would you start? I would say chapters 2, 3, and 4, which is really the proactive side, which is the chapters are keeping it simple. And then there's a bunch of sub-chapters under there, advancing your practice and relationship building as really the primary. I mean, that could take several months to get through those activities. If you're doing an hour PLC every other week or something like that, or once a month, depending on, how frequent you're doing that. I think I added the sections about the research and the science of building relationships as a way for folks, they need to advocate sometimes for the implementation of restorative practices. So whether that's a board of directors, to go to the leaders, like I needed to give this work a little bit more teeth to be able to do that advocacy. So those chapters are really about a little bit of the history and why it would be applicable in areas. But as far as that PLC, that real work, I would say the proactive side, and then it might be a smaller group if you're doing a tiered focus group, might be more for that responsive portions of things. That might be not as many people that are trained in restorative practices, restorative conferencing model, if you will, in that formal conferencing within the school.
Thanks. I just want to say there were some other related questions. Did you write this book for individuals or for people to read it in a group? And I think you did say that to me privately, that really you thought it would be good for the group experience.
Yeah, but it's for both, right? So you have those folks that are trying to implement it all by themselves in the classroom. And I saw one of the questions in the chat is, it's just not about the teacher, right? It's about how do you gain student voice? How do you create that community in the classroom? What does that look like? And so being intentional about doing that and giving you some ideas about how to engage or what questions to ask, or, there's also that time that you're the classroom teacher and something's off. Just people are coming in, you're reading body language, and just being that real teacher saying, okay, let's circle up what's going on, because you're not going to be able to get to any of the academics because something just happened that you're going to have to deal with the issue right away. And to be honest, that just isn't for kids. That's for adults too. And just to be able to tune into that. So, but it's being able to give people voice. This just isn't a delivery method. It's about how do you be inclusive of all those folks, all the participants that are involved, whether that's young elementary school kids, preschool kids, to high schoolers, to higher ed.
I have a lovely question from Susan Willison, who says, "Hi, Craig. Did you have an aha moment as you wrote this?" And I put the question to Kevin too afterwards. Did you have an aha moment as you read it, Kevin?
Yeah, I would say for me, it was more of when I was getting feedback from folks. That was really, really helpful. Steve Core, I've talked to Steve about it. After reading through my initial transcript, I kind of went off onto some tangents and things that, from some of my work in transformative learning theory and stuff, I started to try to educate. And, Steve was really good to say, Craig, get back on track. This is about what people are learning and being able to take next steps. I feel like you're adding way too much information and headed off, and it's getting a bit confusing. And so Susan, thanks for the question. That was a really feedback is wonderful. And I was really thankful, and I had a lot of gratitude that Steve was, able to say, "Hey, Craig, get back on track." And so that was my aha moment. So, Kevin.
And I think I mentioned already, I just kept having aha. My first aha moment, I opened the book and I sat down and I started to read it. And like I said, I relate everything through my lens of training and coaching. I really do. Even when I teach the graduate courses, it's always through the lens of to help people see this in real time. And so my aha, I kept saying, and I think that was my exact text. I shot Craig a text and said, "Wow, this is an awesome resource. I try so hard to help people see this work in real time, try so hard to help people understand this work," because, Craig mentioned all the different names that eventually revolve to restorative practices and how it's aligned with things that, people want to debate about. And so what I try to do in the trainings is that, and my aha was, again, this is a great resource to push that message forward. So.
Great. I got a question from Deborah Walter. She says, on page 40, you said that the circle process can be powerful and destructive at the same time. She says, being aware of boundaries, ethics, and needs. Can you, both of you, can you comment on that?
Sure. So I think, earlier I was talking a little bit about, that balance. So there have been times in our experiences with circles that people may not have been prepared appropriately for a circle that they came to, or it felt more like an ambush than it was a really open and emotional conversation that people felt safe. So I think that there is that dichotomy at times. And so, we really have to be aware of what's the intention for the circle, who's it for. The same thing I talk about as professionals sometimes sharing their own personal information. If it's for the good, of the circle, or, we work in substance abuse. So there's people that are in recovery that might be sharing their own, story. But if it's about them as the professional, that it's helping them and it's not helping the group, then you're treading in areas that you shouldn't be, sharing those things. And so what's the objective? What's the hope? What's the needs of the group? And I think that there's a balance to that. So just like any circle can become punitive in nature if we're not really keen to what the values or what the norms are of the group or things of that sort. Sometimes, it's one person speaks at a time, and I'll walk into a circle and a student will tell another student to shut up, and that's not okay, right? So we have to create those norms about what is good circle practice. But I think circles could be, most times, are wonderful, and if you set up those structures appropriately, then that safety is created, that connection is created, and that community is created, and you can deal with difficult conflict in those situations that you're able to build those things.
Yeah. And the only thing I'll add to that, because I've experienced beautiful circles so many other times, and even in training, there was an assistant superintendent about 4 or 5 years ago. I've been training their staff, and she sat in every time, and her takeaway from the training was that you can build a community in a day. And that was the power of a circle. And I think what Craig said about being intentional is the most important, because I've also seen the ones that go wrong is when people defer to the circle without really understanding all the proactive parts of restorative practices. So, is instead of being aware of what's going on and being intentional, the circle will fix it. I think I was at the conference a few years ago, and I remember, I think it was Monique Morris. She wrote the book Push Out. I remember one of the things that she said that resonated with me. She said that some of the struggles with restorative practices is that people limit it to just thinking it's just circles, and it's not just circles. So it's being intentionally engaging. You're building that capacity way before you sit down in a circle. And I think in that case, and especially for a responsive circle, the time you spend prepping is going to really impact how the responsive circle goes. So I just think just circle, beautiful. But really understand where circles fit, I think, gives them a better chance of being successful.
So I'm getting such great questions from this group. I'm just going to read this one. It relates to what you're talking about, but I just think there's always a risk of a student being triggered by a memory and having a meltdown. Is the rest of the class circle expected to deal with that and provide healing, or is it recommended to have an out-of-class safety net? I just want to read this comment because I feel like there's a connection here. This book has not only been a great guide for my own self-reflection, but it has been really awesome to invite teachers to help me reflect on how I practice. Asking their thoughts and valuing their reflections on my approach has strengthened relationships and increased awareness, interest, and desire to learn how to practice, teach in a restorative manner. And I also think of the question we always get about buy-in. And I just feel like there's some connection here, that asking the kind of hard question, like, is the rest of the class expected to deal with this with your other colleagues who are trying to figure out the same things or working with the same issues themselves. And I guess that's the kind of the nature of this book, that it feels like it's really going to give you the questions that you can ask to derive your own answers, right? Because we could spend hours and hours and try to answer every specific question, but that's not the goal. Can you just speak to all that? I know it's rambling, but I feel like it's a useful comment somehow.
Yeah, listen, I think that in at least my own experiences, meltdown is relative. And, I think that working in the alternative schools and the drug and alcohol programs, I've seen some pretty extreme behavior. And I know Kevin's worked in residential facilities, and I originally worked in a secure sex offender facility. So, I've seen the gamut of some of those things. So is it expected that the classroom, repair the harm? No, I mean, kids might be experiencing trauma for years and the harm's not going to be repaired in a class, but we might be able, depending on where the student is, just ask, how can we support you right now, right? And some folks can, some of the students can say in the class how they might support Craig, right now, or something like that. But it doesn't end there. You're going to get the supports and the needs met of that student, whether that's the guidance counselor or outside counseling and things of that sort. Sometimes we have multiple professional agencies that are involved with a student that, if there's a certain incident or behavior that they need additional supports, we're gonna do that. But I'm also I appreciate, even though if it feels like a lot of emotion, that emotion's coming out in a circle or in a place that someone can get the help that they need, rather than it coming out someplace where maybe they're not going to be able to get the help that they need. So sometimes it may feel like a lot, but that's an opportunity for healing that may not happen in the classroom, but we'll at least start to facilitate what that might look like. So that's what I'm appreciative of in those situations.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly add to that, because another thing that resonated with me a while ago when I was learning about restorative practice, and start really appreciating it as a framework. And it's a reminder to not forget what you know. We come into this work, we come into learning about restorative practice with skills, especially working in education, social service, and mental health. So restorative practice is not about throwing away those skills. And for example, we're going to know the people in our classroom because we build relationships with them, because we know their story, because we know their story behind the story. So those are the kind of things we're continuing to work on. And so to create that safe, brave space in that circle where it can get emotional. But we know our kids. I remember I did a training one time and using the restorative question cards, and it was a school psychologist in the training, and she said, well, I work with a lot of kids who, if you ask them about impact on other people, you may trigger suicidal ideation. And so what I said to her, again, you bring your whole self to this work. So if you're working with a student, a young person, a person that that is an issue, then you need to think about how you navigate that. And so that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you. All right. Our students and teachers in California have been out of class for 18 months due to COVID-19. How might this book help rebuild and heal our teaching community when we resume our in-person classroom learning this August? Kevin, why don't you take this one first?
Well, something I learned during the pandemic that I have adopted for a lot of situations, and I'm actually doing them for 3 school districts to start the year off. And I've been doing a lot of this work with teenagers. We've started a series of listening circles when IIRP provided those, right shortly after the pandemic started. So in preparation to give that space, that safe, brave space where people can start processing something, that's a big point for me. And again, it started with adults, and now there are several teenagers. I actually work with some teenage groups who are starting to facilitate right along with the adults, listening circles for our community. So to me, that's a start. It's really just giving an opportunity to process. And then you move toward next steps, like talking about how you're going to utilize this book. The book is very, very structured, and it gives you activities. So whether you go in order or whether you go out of place based on needs. So that's my takeaway from it. That is, it is, again, we're constantly learning skills, and we're learning processes, and utilizing all of those. This book is a great resource, but it's also all the restorative work that we do is what makes any resource better. So.
Yeah, I would just add that building relationship just isn't face-to-face, and we've all been forced into this virtual world. So, a lot of the exercises that I have and the tips are for virtual classrooms too. I teach in the graduate school. We start with a check-in, before we get into content. There was a webinar I was a part of the other day, a principal at a charter school in New York, and his main emphasis was student needs before curriculum. So he needed to make sure that his students' needs of whether it was food or whether it was how the internet, being able to have to just get into that learning space. Let's start there. So I think that, starting from that point, whether you're online or in person, is really helpful for me, and thinking about your own context as well.
All right, I think let's go to this one. I'm going to squeeze a couple more in. Tina Maru wrote in the chat, Craig mentioned checking your biases during your initial talk. Does the book explicitly address cultural responsiveness, its relationship with restorative practices?
It does, in the sense that you as a practitioner, what are you bringing to the table, and being able to define what your own biases are. There's some exercises within the book that talk about you being reflective as a practitioner, as a group, what bias you have, and being able to name that and claim that. And from an adult learning perspective, this is to be able to articulate that and think about what does that mean in your practice and how do you engage with that. So there are some activities around that. There is a diversity, equity, and inclusion chapter that talks and starts to explore that and talk about how do you create community and brave conversations. But there's some proactive work that needs to be done before some of those circles can happen. The example that Kevin gave, that you just jump into things without building a sense of community and safety with each other. So yes, there's some specific. Is there anything? There's not a specific chapter on, and I go with the terminology of cultural curiosity. I don't believe as a practitioner I'll ever be competent in all the cultures of the world, but I'm really, really curious. But I think that this book lends to that curious mindset and really learning about other human beings.
And I think just real quickly, the way the book is designed too, and that's where the references at the bottom, when Craig covers a topic or an area, it's that opportunity to use that resource at the bottom to go that deeper dive in that area, including bias and cultural responsiveness and things like that. So.
All right. So I just want to let everyone know there's going to be, this was recorded. There will be a follow-up email with that recording that you can share. It will be on our website. Please look in the store.iirp.edu if you'd like to purchase a copy of Intentional Classroom Engagement. And before we go, can you guys say 20 seconds about the event coming up in July? And Ben, you could pull that slide up. Craig?
Yeah, I'm just excited. So one of the ideas behind this was just to introduce the book. So this is our first event. So thanks for joining us today. But thinking about doing a little bit deeper dive, session 1 is about the proactive activities. And I have a couple of the activities I'm pulling out for us to do together. And session 2 is about the responsive side of the book and picking out some activities specific to being responsive and some of my experiences in doing some of that work together. So that's the idea behind the digging into the workbook a bit. So join us.
Yes.
And there'll be information going out about that as well. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Craig. Thanks, Ben Wachtel, helping with the tech. We'll see you next time. We're going to leave the chat open for about 5 minutes. if you want to finish your conversations. All right, see you next time.
Thanks again.
Yeah. Take care, everyone. I got there.